I'm Reverend Kennetha Bigham-Tsai, Chief Connectional Ministries Officer of the Connectional Table. Friends, Wesley's historic questions were about what to teach, how to teach, and what to do. For these features of the Connectional Table's emerging forum, we are seeking to update these questions for our current moment. We are inviting energetic conversation that we hope will illumine our identity, which is tied to what and how we teach, our preferred actions, what we do, and our abiding hopes as we envision the future United Methodist Church. Our intent is to generate passion and energy for constructive conversations that help us walk forward together. Today, I am talking with Bishop Christian Alsted, Chair of the Connectional Table, and the Bishop of the Nordic-Baltic Episcopal area in the Northern Europe and Eurasia Central Conference. Good afternoon, Bishop Alsted.
Good afternoon, Kennetha.
Welcome. Tell me about your journey in ministry and your current ministry setting, and tell us something that you think people don't know about your ministry context that they should.
Well, Kennetha, I started young. I was only 22 when I was ordained deacon in 1984, and one month later I got married to Elizabeth, and we started our journey. Had our first appointment on the Danish west coast, a two-point appointment, and I was ordained an elder in 86 and served in a number of different appointments through the years. I always had a passion for making disciples, developing small group ministries, especially engaging with people outside of the church, explore new ministries. I was part of planting a church out of one of the churches I served, and some years later we planted a second church with different leadership out of that church, and it has just always been part of my thinking. I guess my DNA in ministry to really want to engage in God's mission and look for opportunities to do that. We had a time in the U.S. where I did a D-Min at Asbury Theological Seminary in leadership and preaching, and I served for as a DS for 6 years, and then I was elected to the Episcopacy in 2009 and serve in the Nordic and Baltic area, which is 7 countries. It is Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, my own country, and then the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. To share just a little bit about what I think people might not know is that this area is very diverse. Some of the countries have 150 years history of Methodism. Others, and that is the Baltic states, have had an interruption during the Soviet occupation from 1949. In Estonia, they were able to continue to function as a church under certain restrictions and limitations, while in Latvia and Lithuania, the church was totally closed down. We lost all of our churches, and people were not allowed to gather as Methodists. But the church was restarted in the mid-90s. And so it's a young church in Latvia and Lithuania. It's a very theologically diverse area, also socially, socio-economic, diverse area. In the Nordic countries, we have a state church system with a very high membership. It's a Lutheran church. They have a membership between 70 to 85% of the population, but only between 2 and 5% attend worship on a regular Sunday. So So we have this high membership of church, but then in very secular countries, very low attendance. So that's the tension that we live in. Here we are a minority church, often referred to as a free church, because we are independent from the state, as opposed to the Lutheran State Church.
What do you deem essential to the ministry and role of the annual conference? And what do you see as essential to the ministry of the local church, given all that you've said in terms of the context that you serve?
Kennetha, I would say that really at the core, both for the annual conference and really the local church, is connectionalism. The basic understanding that we belong together and that we are better together. That 1 + 1 oftentimes equals 2.5 or 3. That the importance of supporting each other, of being partners in ministry and mission, learning together, learning from each other, as we explore what it means to be in ministry in our unique contexts. So mission and pursuing God's mission, both for the local church and for the annual conference, it's really at the core. I want to quote from one of my friends, Martin Atkins, the former General Secretary of the British Methodist Church, who said that Methodism can best be described as a discipleship movement shaped for mission. And I think that really describes what we're about, what the local church should be about, and what the annual conference should be about.
Now, many are talking and thinking about what the future of the United Methodist Church might be. You've talked about a discipleship movement directed toward mission. What does that church look like from a worldwide perspective? And is it even a worldwide church when you think about connectionalism? Some are grappling with those questions right now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Oh yeah, to me, it's definitely a worldwide church. I think that is one of the things that characterizes us as Methodists. That our view is global. What is also very important when we think about what a future Methodist church would look like is an understanding of who we are. I find that best expressed really and very short in our doctrinal heritage, where it says our struggles for human dignity and social reform have been a response to God's demand for love, mercy, and justice in the light of the kingdom. We proclaim no personal gospel that fails to express itself in relevant social concerns, and we proclaim no social gospel that does not include the personal transformation of sinners. This, to me, is at the very core of who we are as Methodists, and no matter what the future church look like, this needs to be at the very core of that church. So that is an important part. You remember that 5 to 10 years ago, not only in the Methodist Church, but across the world, we spoke about the global village. We spoke about globalization, and at that time, globalization was a positive thing. That was something that we were striving towards. The world was coming together. And we used that expression, a global village. But now we talk about separation. We talk about walls. Our leaders promote nationalism. And I'm concerned that as a church, that we get caught up in what is being said by national leaders rather than what the gospel calls us to do and to be. And I think the gospel calls us to be in connection with each other. The gospel sees us as one people, as the people of God. It doesn't speak about borders. It doesn't speak about boundaries. It speaks about us being called from darkness out into his wonderful light. We have become one people. And I think that is something that we need to hold on to in a time that tries to move us in a different way, in a different direction.
And what you're laying before us is truly the challenge that we're facing. We exist within our social and national contexts. And right now, you see a lot of talk about borders and the rise in nationalism. I've even been reading recently about the rise in Christian nationalism within the United States. How does the church begin to counter this? What do we do? That was one of Wesley's historic questions. What do we do when we want to hold on to that theology that you have so beautifully described that defines who we are biblically and theologically, but yet we're challenged in terms of how to live that out in our relationships within the church. And our connectionalism is challenged right now. How do we do this? What do we do to get us to the place that you so eloquently describe?
You alluded to Wesley's question, his original conference question, where the first was what to teach. And I think it's very much about our teaching. It's very much about our theology. Sometimes we have a hard time distinguishing between theology and culture. And I think we need to hold the two apart. We need to be very clear what is the gospel and what does our culture say. They don't always contradict each other, but there are times when our culture or where the current rhetoric in our culture is moving us away from the core of the gospel. So I think it is our task as leaders, as bishops, as part of our teaching office to really emphasize this and emphasize the core of the gospel.
Now, recently, the Norway Annual Conference, which is part of your Episcopal area, voted to issue an apology to LGBTQ people. Tell us about the process that annual conference used to reach that decision, their decision-making. What was the process? How did that relate to one another? And given that you serve in a very theologically diverse area, how do we embrace differences and dissent as being as important as shared understandings and agreements?
Well, it's interesting out of many different perspectives. One of the perspectives certainly is that Norway is the most theologically diverse conference in my area, and yet they were able to come to an agreement that was widely supported throughout the conference, also by those who hold very diverse theological positions. There was a petition that came to the annual conference, which was simply a petition to apologize to LGBTQ plus persons who've been harmed by the church over the years. This was an online annual conference, and it's difficult to have complicated discussions online. An online platform is not really made for that. But we did have some good debate before the annual conference came to the decision that they wanted to offer an official apology, and they did not go with the wording in the original petition. Rather, they asked the Annual Conference Council to work on the wording and to decide on the wording and then make it public. And this was, as I said before, it was affirmed by delegates really across the theological spectrum. It simply said, it's very short, it simply said, the Methodist Church in Norway admits and apologizes for the condemning attitudes and actions that have inflicted insults, harm, and suffering on LGBTQ plus people instead of dignity. And I believe the Annual Conference was only able to make such a decision in a peaceful and respectful manner because last year, well, again, 2019, of course, the summer of 2019, we introduced a consensus process in the Annual Conference. And we used it very successfully when the Annual Conference wanted to express or decided to express an intention of moving towards becoming a fully inclusive church. We were able to move through that process in 2019 in a way where I believe everybody felt that they were heard and that their position was respected and accepted, and where the conference, all delegates in the conference respected that this is the will of the conference. But the Annual Conference has taken these steps, and they have done it in a very respectful way. Perhaps that could, on the larger scale, be possible for the whole denomination as well.
What are you learning in your Episcopal area, in your ministry context, from your experience of dealing with this pandemic? And what do those learnings say to us about the future of the church?
I mean, to us, as I believe to all people across the world, really, this has been strange. It has been a challenging, very demanding year, and at times it's been really tough. I would also say, out of a leadership perspective, it's also been an extremely interesting year. I have seen the church show its full vitality, and it has really, it's really taught me that the church shows its vitality when it's under pressure. I'm so grateful to our pastors and deacons and leaders. I've been really impressed and also proud of the way that they have handled the crisis, how quickly they switched to online church, live streaming, messages, devotions, all kinds of creative ministries and ways also to reach out to people and to help and support people in the communities. Over the years, we have had many conversations in my Episcopal area about fresh expressions of church. We've had many seminars on this, but the interesting thing was that now we were all forced to do this. We were all forced to develop fresh expressions of church. We were all forced to think and to act out of the box. And suddenly people realized that it's actually possible to experiment. It's actually possible to try things out. It's not dangerous, and we are learning from this. So there is much that we take with us into the future from that experience. I have been reminded during this time that church is physical. It's physical in many different ways. We come together, we touch, We talk to each other, we hug each other, we sing together, we pray together, we talk, we share communion together, we baptize our children. Church is physical in so many different ways. And when that element is gone, there is so much that we are missing, that we are not able to do. We can only do so much online. It can never replace physical community. I think what we have seen suffer the most from this time has been our children and youth ministry. It's been really, really hard on them. It's been hard for children and youth in general because of the many restrictions. And I think because of the physical element has just not been there. Also, in an increasingly individualistic world, we have been reminded about the importance of fellowship. I actually think many people in our culture have lost that, or didn't realize how important fellowship is. Oftentimes, we don't realize how important things are until we get to a point when we don't have them. And I think that has happened to us.
And that certainly has placed some challenges before us, as well as some opportunities for creativity.
Absolutely. But now in these coming months, I think we have to be very, very attentive. I think there'll be some windows of opportunity in these coming months where people will, because people are so hungry for fellowship, people are hungry for spirituality. But if we are not ready when those windows open again and we can move around more freely and we can connect and relate more freely, we can miss great opportunities, because those spaces will quickly be filled by other things. So as Christians, as church, we need to pay attention to what is happening in these coming months.
And that's interesting, because you're one of the first people that I've heard talk about how to prepare for kind of post-pandemic. In a sense, we're so right now focused on trying to get through this, but there will be a time when we will be able to safely gather again. What would you suggest, around getting ready for that? If there's if you're anticipating a heightened hunger for spirituality and for fellowship, what would you do to prepare for that ahead of time?
First of all, I would point to individual Christians, individual Methodists, building relationships, connecting with people, and I think they're already doing that. And to expand and build on those connections, creating networks, meeting with people. I think that is a way. To start. I think people will be hungry for spiritual experiences, and they will be hungry for fellowship. And we should begin to plan what we are going to roll out when we can begin to move more freely and we can begin to connect with each other. We will not get back to normal. There is no such thing. We will not get back to where we were before. There will be perhaps a new normal, but we will be able to move freely again, and we will be able to connect. And I think as church, we are experts in those fields. So we should prepare and use that expertise and be ready to offer places of connection, places of spiritual experience, places of fellowship.
It's interesting that you say that in a time where many in our church are thinking about downsizing, the sense that the church is maybe getting smaller, contracting, and what you're describing is preparing to go out. Mm-hmm. How do you reconcile those two images?
Well, I think there are people during this time who have unlearned attending church. Some of them may even be former very active participants in the life of the church, but they've unlearned church, or they feel that online worship is more comfortable to them. And I'm sure that online worship will remain a significant part of our ministry in the future. I think that is part of what we're learning during this time. I also think that there will be others, and perhaps people who are not even in touch with the church at this point, who are hungry for what the church has to offer. So while we may lose some, I am quite sure that we will gain more.
To think about this church that we envision in the future, and these calls that God, the ways in which God is calling us into the future, this is going to require us to adapt. Now, some think that our governance structures keep us from adapting. Which aspect of our governance do you believe represent essential organizing principles that are critical to maintain, and which are open more to contextual adaptations, or which should be more flexible? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah. Basically, I don't think there is anything in our current structure that prevents us from engaging in God's mission. I think that there can be changes that needs to be made that can equip us better or free us up to engage in God's mission. But basically, I don't think it's the structure that prevents us from doing it. When I look at what is at the core of who we are, what defines us, I would say things like our doctrine, understanding of connectionalism, our conferencing, superintending, supervision. I would say that what we would need would be a very limited book of discipline that really outlines the basic principles, but then leaves it to the different regions of the church to work out the details. And I could say the same about the social principles as an important part of our book of discipline, that they should be short, succinct, rooted in theology, but then leave it to the regions to work out the details. Because the thing is, yes, we are one church, we are one United Methodist Church, but for decades we have acted as if we were McDonald's. I like to talk about the McDonaldization of the church. It's like you have the same menu everywhere. You offer the same everywhere. It's exactly the same. No matter where you go, you will be able to recognize it's more or less the same. But even McDonald's has left that kind of thinking. They adapt their flavors, they adapt their menu to the different regions of the world. And our world is becoming more and more diverse. So there is a need to be able to adapt to those unique contexts. And that has influence on the way we structure. That has influence on our governance.
It sounds like what you're talking about is emphasizing greater self-determination and self-governance regionally, right? So that we can be, connected in mission globally, but decisions are being made within a particular local context. How do we get to that place? And is it time? It sounds like you're saying that it's time for that. So how do we get to that place?
I think it's time for that. I think it's a desire that is or a need that is felt really across the church in the different regions. But I'm not quite sure that we know how to get there. I think there are several different avenues of getting there, like the Connectional Table, who has, we brought a petition to organize the United States as a regional conference, more or less on the same level as the central conferences in other regions of the world. I think that could be one way. Another way is what has been proposed through the Standing Committee and Central Conference Matters, with their proposal for a general book of discipline that does pretty much what I talked about earlier. Perhaps those two things needs to be combined. I know that there are other petitions brought to General Conference that might accomplish this. Perhaps we will find that at General Conference, when we get there, whenever we get there, there will be wisdom to find other solutions to this. But I think it is an area where we do need to find solution. Oftentimes the church moves slowly. At times it's healthy and good that we move slowly, but at times it is also a real problem.
As we know, General Conference has been delayed until August, September of 2021 because of the pandemic. What do you think about the idea of having a virtual event? With such an event, if there has to be a further delay in General Conference because of the pandemic, would a virtual General Conference disenfranchise people in the central conferences? Do you think we can make complicated decisions like this virtually? Or how might we think about ensuring equity in participation for all regions if we had to have a virtual General Conference? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, those are some great questions. I think it'll be difficult to have a virtual General Conference. First of all, I think at this point, and really for the conference planned for August, September, I don't think it will happen. I don't think it will be safe. I don't think many of the delegates would not have received the vaccine in August, September. I don't expect travel across the world to be possible at that time. So an alternative would be some kind of virtual meeting. But that presents some serious problems. I've been in so many online meetings over these last years, and so often have had the experience that some people are not able to connect because of poor internet connection or unstable internet connection, and that can happen in all parts of the world. And some parts of the world have more difficulties with this than others. So I would say that the more wealthy countries, they would have an advantage, and that would be a serious equity problem in the church. We are already not on an unequal footing. When we're using an American parliamentary system like Robert's Rules of Order, and then to continue to give certain parts of the church an advantage because they're able to participate more freely on an online platform than others. I just don't think that would be just. That would not be right, and that would not correspond with who we are. I understand the urgency that many people are talking about with getting to a general conference, and many feel that there are important things on our agenda that we really need to deal with, and we cannot continue to push that before us. And in a way, it feels to me like they close their eyes for the reality that we are in as the world. for decades, we have been a very self-centered, self-occupied church. We have focused too much on our own UMC belly button, and I've been part of this. There's so many voices speaking about the necessity of getting to a general conference as soon as possible, or sometimes almost at any cost. But we forget that we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Thousands of people are dying from this across the world right now. Our countries are on a lockdown. The wealthy countries, and I live in one of those wealthy countries, have made sure that they have more than enough vaccines. And they are just buying because they can afford it. But the rest of the world is on its own. I heard in a report from South Africa just a few days ago where they are struggling with a new mutation, and they're not even sure that the vaccines that we have will be effective on that mutation. And the person who was being interviewed said that our government has bought enough vaccines for 10% of the population to receive the vaccine before the end of this year. 10%, and South Africa is not one of the poorest countries in the world. So the world struggled to recover from the impact of the pandemic, or will begin to struggle to recover. Right now we are fighting it. And we seem to think that the most important matter on our agenda as a United Methodist Church is to solve our own internal tensions. What are we thinking? Is that really what God is calling the United Methodist Church to do in 2021? Is that really the most important thing for us to come together? Shouldn't we rather come together to explore and discern what is God calling us to do in a world suffering from serious problems? How can we best be the church during this time and serve the people God loved? We seem to have forgotten that God so loved the world. And this is just becoming, increasingly clear to me that we really have our focus in the wrong place.
That's a vision of a church that focuses on mission, that focuses on bringing together social holiness and personal holiness, that focuses on what is God's call to the church, as opposed to our tendency to look inward at ourselves, and that is our struggle. But it gets back to Wesley's question of what do we teach? And to begin to teach that, and to call people to that, and to inspire around that. Bishop Alsted, is there anything that I haven't asked that you would want to say?
I think we've covered a lot of areas in this conversation, but I just want to get back to what I think is, at least to me, is the core question, and that is, what is God calling us to do? How is He calling us to engage in His mission at this time? We are really at a very, very special time in this world. When have we ever been in a situation? I mean, it's probably if we go back perhaps to World War II. But have we since World War II ever been in a situation where a large part of the world's population have had the same experience of a life-threatening disease. At that time, it was a life-threatening, destructive war, but now it's a life-threatening disease that really that really threatens our way of life, our everyday life, and everything has changed for us in this past year. So where is God calling us to be the church? What is He calling us to be in the middle of this? That is my big question, and it's also my prayer. God, where are you calling us to be?